Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, nestlings, arse peasants, vassals, Chinese, Israelis, spies. I'm a useful idiot, and today I want to talk about something that's old news in certain circles, but I think people constantly need to be reminded of this, because particularly in a point in U.S. history when we are having to look within and find out that we've been spreading money all over the globe while America has been going hungry. And this story exemplifies that. And I'm also going to cover a lot more ground than some of the stories out there. But what we're talking about here is Israeli arms sales, particularly Israeli arms sales to China. Because as it turns out, according to the U.S.-China Security Review Commission, these investigators found out that Israel is second only to Russia in supplying very advanced arms to China. So let that sink in. Next to Russia, Israel is the biggest advanced arms seller to China. So this is fairly complex on a number of levels. Of course, first, the fact that Russia and Israel are both aligned selling arms to China, who are purportedly an enemy of the U.S. And as I've mentioned before, I'm one of the few that thinks that we're probably not going to be going to war with China. But, of course, we can never rule these events out. Things happen. That's the nature of history. But anyway, this would support the fact that we're all in just one big globalized corporate market, and that wars are going to be more localized and focused. We're not going to have this massive destruction because there's markets to be had. We don't want to destroy China because we would just be destroying a huge future market for American companies. So anyway, I digress. So let's get down to it. So here's Israel, a country that gets $3 billion in U.S. aid annually. So keep that in mind, U.S. taxpayers, because we're giving $3 billion in U.S. aid to Israel annually. As it turns out, they're making a profit on that money. And they get these arms from Israel, and then China sells these same systems to countries like North Korea, Libya, Pakistan, and Iran. And as you will note when I read off that list, of course, those are all countries that are big, big friends of the United States: Iran, North Korea, Libya, and Pakistan. So they all received technology from China that China got from Israel, that Israel got from us, and that's the point I'm driving at here. So, but not to point out that Israel is the only friend of the U.S. that sells arms to China, because it turns out France and Germany are also massive suppliers of arms to China. But the distinction being that we finance a lot of Israel's military. We do all the research and development and give them the military technology that American taxpayers pay for, and then Israel turns around and makes a profit of it. So that's one thing that's different between Israel and France and Germany supplying arms. And so what kind of advanced technologies am I talking about here? Well, Israel supplying China with target and acquisition and fire control for guided missiles. That doesn't sound like a good idea. Radar and anti-radar systems. That doesn't sound like a good idea. The kind of technology that we want our supposed friend, Israel, supplying to our supposed enemy, China. Optical and telecommunications equipment, drones, flight simulators, and just so all you neocons don't go crazy, this is, of course, an era that encompasses the Bush administration and the Obama administration that have done nothing about Israeli arms sales to China, with one notable exception. Actually, there was a potential sale 2 years ago of advanced early warning aircraft, 4 of them, and under U.S. pressure, Israel caved in and canceled that order to China. And so, of course, that was under the Obama administration. And one Pentagon spokesman mentioned that the anti-radar Harpy drone, and said that transfer to China of that technology was astounding, because it could directly impair the effectiveness of U.S. cruise missiles. So we're talking about advanced technology being supplied by Israel to China that undermines the very effectiveness of some of the dominant military technologies that the U.S. has. And there's a long history. In 1993, the director of the CIA himself charged Israel with selling arms for a decade to China. And that includes fighters, missiles, and tanks. So all through the 80s and up to the early 90s, Israel was known to be selling fighters, missiles, and tanks to China. And of course, that again was all technology that they acquired from the U.S. that they passed on to the Chinese. And this is also interesting because China and Israel didn't even have diplomatic relations until 1992. So that means surreptitiously, the Chinese and Israeli governments on the surface were not recognizing each other, but were still involved in arms trade. And that's the way the real world works. So always keep that in mind. Everything's not as black and white as it seems. The friends and enemies list can get very confusing sometimes. And then 6 years ago, Israel transferred jet technology developed by the U.S. that now is showing up in China's new F-10 fighter. So there we have more direct evidence that Israel transferred jet technology that they got and it was developed by the United States. And now here it is 6 years later, and it's showing up in China's brand new F-10 fighters. So that's probably not good news either. And then in December 2011, it was discovered that Israel was trying to ship 69 Patriot missiles to China. And we all know that's not a good thing. And luckily, the ship was intercepted in Finland, and all the missiles were removed. But there's another sensitive military technology from the United States being sold by Israel to China. And the Israeli military apparently even has offices in China so they can quickly and easily do business. And this is another thing that people don't realize about Israel. So the United States is subsidizing Israel to the tune of $3 billion in U.S. aid annually, and much more on top of that. And yet Israel turns around and uses all this military technology and all this equipment and all this aid that we give them to turn around and export 75% of its own military production. So swallow that. A country that's barely the size of New Jersey exports 75% of all the military production in their own country to other countries. And that was, they produced $9.6 billion in profits in 2010. So 2010, there's $9.6 billion, an all-time record for the Israeli arms business. And they are in the top 4 arms exporters in the world. So they're a good company, once again, for such a small country. And most recently, the most alarming thing is the U.S. completely funded the Iron Dome missile system that they're so proud of now. And it's built by an Israeli company. So it's funded by the U.S., providing jobs for people in Israel. And it's an Iron Dome system. And now, after the U.S. paid for it, and the state of Israel has implemented that system, now they're talking about possibly selling that system to European NATO states. And that technology is also showing up in their arms sales in Latin America. In fact, in 2010 and 2011, they have huge deals with Brazil, an $85 million deal in Brazil in 2011, including fighter jets and drones. And they also recently, in 2010, signed an agreement with India as well. So they're trying to get into the India arms market and the Brazil arms market, any of the countries they can get involved in. It's very sensitive for Israel to be involved with China. They certainly can't sell arms to many Middle Eastern countries, and they're shut out of the market of Taiwan. So they have to go where the money is. So there we have it. Israel, second only to Russia in selling advanced military technology to China, and one of the biggest arms dealers in the world, and U.S. subsidizes all that, and they get to profit off it. And so just to put it in clear picture, I'm going to finish up this video by giving you a list of all the countries that Israel is known to have sold weapons to, just to put it all in perspective, and pay particular attention to the very last country I mentioned. And let me remind you that they were selling arms to that country previous to 1979, but nonetheless pretty ironic. So let's go down the list of countries that Israel sells arms to. Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, Venezuela, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Liberia, Morocco, Nigeria, Rhodesia, also known as South Africa, Swaziland, Tanzania, Uganda, Zaire, now known as Democratic Republic of Congo, Australia, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, New Zealand, Papua-New Guinea, Philippines, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Taiwan on occasion, Thailand, and last, Iran. So up until the Shah was ousted, Israel used to supply arms to Iran. And there you go. So it goes in the world. So there you have it. How interesting is that? The complex nature of politics, the complex nature of globalization, the complex nature of arms sales. This is how the real world works. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.